Church, we did it. We did it. School is over. No more pencils, no more books, no more homeschool teachers' dirty looks. Right? We did it. You all deserve a round of applause. If you are a parent and you somehow made it through, I congratulate you. It's been rough. It was a struggle. And I'm not even the one teaching the kids in my house, but I can tell it has worn some of us out, some of you out. And I just want to congratulate you. You did it. And we got beautiful weather. I hope you guys are going to make the most of this summer. And really, it's going to be a summer to remember. I think there's a lot of negative that we can look at from 2020 already. But I think this is going to be a big year that we're all going to look back on, and hopefully we're going to look back on some major changes that have happened in our country, and for the good, even though it might have taken a lot of bad to get us there. And so we're excited about things to come. We're excited about Journey Church and where we're heading this summer. Some really cool events that are going to be coming up. Pretty soon we'll be able to share a little bit of information on what that is, but we want to let you know that we haven't forgotten you guys. We have some cool stuff planned for this summer. We hope you're excited about it. Couple of things coming up this Sunday, today, is going to be great. We have really worked hard on the content of this message, and believe in it. Have prayed through this a ton over the past week. And so I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope it's thought-provoking, and it will be a great message, I think, for everybody needs to hear. So we're super excited about that. This coming Friday is going to be trivia night. We're doing another trivia night. It's going to be family-friendly again. We are going to be focusing on, I'm thinking superhero fantasy night. So start brushing up on your skills. This includes DC and Marvel. We'll throw some kids superhero stuff in there as well, that maybe your kids will know and you'll have no clue about. But kids trivia, it's going to be this Friday, or family trivia this Friday, 7 p.m. It's going to be on Facebook Live. I'll be hosting in my glamorous red sequin coat as well. So it should be a good time. But we invite you guys out to that. It's going to be a blast. And that's all I got. Hope you guys are having a great weekend. And here's Jim. Talk to you guys soon.
Hi, everybody. This is the first time I can remember in church where, as we moved toward the weekend, I felt like what we were planning to do was not the right thing to do. So I called our directional team and told them we needed to do something completely different. I couldn't imagine gathering, even in this format, without addressing what's happening in our country. George Floyd's death at the hands of a police officer and our response to it. As you know, the officer in the video has been charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. But as your pastor, I just want to say a few things. First of all, if your heart isn't broken over the death of Floyd, please examine your heart. The author of Proverbs tells us that from it flows the springs of life. And as a Jesus follower, our daily prayer should be, help me to see as you see and to respond as you would respond. God, help me to see as you see and help me to respond as you respond. Number two, a few years ago, I heard this quote. In 1976, during one of his lectures, Dr. King said this: "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And frankly, I don't want to be silent anymore. Many white people, including me, are silent because we don't know what to say and can do something, or we can do nothing. But understand this, if we do nothing, it's like condoning that action. So for those of us that want to speak up and don't know what to say, this is for you. As you know, our church doesn't veer into politics much, but we are going to head straight into this because this isn't a political issue. Race and racism is not a promotion of some political agenda. It's a human issue, and it affects all of us. As we're going to see, it's an issue that's been around for thousands of years, and it has affected the first century church, and with God's help, they overcame it, and so can we. I want to invite you into a conversation I had this week with a friend, with Brian, and a good friend, Jermaine Walker. Jermaine, his wife Whitney, and their 3 beautiful children have attended our church and served here for many years. On Monday, I called Jermaine to check in and ask him how he and his family were doing, and really to ask if he'd be interested in having a conversation on race, racism, and faith. As he told me how they were doing, my heart broke, and I can honestly say I haven't felt that kind of grief in a long, long time. I'm so glad he agreed to do this. Our conversation is over an hour long, so we're going to take some of the best pieces for this message, but if you'd like to hear the full version, head over to our Facebook page. I hope you'll take the time to listen to this interview. I hope it will open your eyes, and I hope your heart will be moved.
How we doing?
Hey, doing well. Thank you guys. I appreciate you reaching out. It's funny because me being, a black male in America and plus being a police officer is a unique stance with everything that took place. And I've stayed away from the social media piece and posting, and the amount of emotion that I've been going through is a lot. And, those who know me, I'm very passionate about a lot of things. And those that don't know me, they believe I don't talk a lot. And I'm a very, serious and sometimes a little scary looking individual. But, I appreciate Jim reaching out and Brian. And, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I see a Maine Black Bears helmet in the background there.
Oh, yes.
Is that from the glory days?
Yeah, it was only a couple of years ago, maybe 2, 3 years, we won't talk about the numbers.
Definitely. Awesome. Jermaine, I can't thank you enough for being here. I think instead of me trying to tell people a little about your story, let's hear it from you. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? You don't have to take all night if you don't want, but
yeah.
What brought you here?
I'll give you the abbreviated version. I've been directed by Mrs. Walker to try to be as short as possible, but still giving you a good idea of who I am. Again, Jermaine Walker. Most people, some who have spoken to me know. I was born in Jamaica. Lived there for 9 years. At around age 5, my parents came to the United States to try to help to get me a better life. Being in Jamaica, it's not all palm trees and beaches as all the catalogs and all the commercials would lead you to believe. It's a hard life. I grew up with bars on my windows, bars on my doors, a gated gate out front, and I was inside before the sun came down. There were kids being kidnapped, murdered, all of the above. A lot of gang violence, and they didn't want that for me. So they tried to get me in the United States. Unfortunately, in other countries, it's a lot harder to get out than most people might lead you to believe. So they tried to do it the legal way. And after sinking a good amount of money into that, they decided that was knocking on a door that was never going to open. So they started filing legal paperwork for me to get in the country. And at 9, I apologize, at 8, I ended up spending a year with a family that I didn't know in one of the harder cities, towns in Jamaica. And my sister, who's 3 years older than I was with me as well. So we had to go and take on a totally different name, grow up amongst stabbings, shootings, all of the above for probably about a year until all the paperwork could go through and the government could believe that we're part of that family. And as soon as everything went well, I flew up. I want to say it was the winter, by myself. I ended up going into immigration when I came to the United States because it's unusual for a student to be traveling alone, who's supposed to be a U.S. citizen around that time. It wasn't Christmas. It was earlier in the year. And so they questioned me. It's funny, the question that I still remember till this day, that they asked me that was one of the key points to me coming in this country or being sent back to Jamaica was, what is the color of the school bus? And luckily for me, I used to watch TV every Saturday because that was the only time that TV shows were on. And one of the shows I watched, there was a school bus that was there, and I said orange, which they were like, that's close enough. So I was able to come in, and we're able to. I came in New York. My parents were in New Jersey, so they came and picked me up. I grew up in New Jersey, and New Jersey for me was. It's so funny because New Jersey is its own. I want to say it's like its own little country, because you could be in most people who grew up in New Jersey, they never leave New Jersey, and they believe that New Jersey is like the rest of like New Jersey is what the rest of the United States is, So I was lucky enough to grow up with a huge diversity population of everyone or every race you could possibly think of. One of my first jobs was actually a Jewish bagel shop where I grew to love whitefish salad. I don't even know how to make it. I don't know what it is, but it was delicious. And luckily I latched on to football. I was always a larger kid, and it fit in. And I ended up doing well in high school, and unfortunately I was a knucklehead in school for my first 2 years. And so the opportunity for schools was very limited as far as scholarship went. I ended up getting 2 scholarships to New Hampshire and Maine, and Maine was the winning team back then, so I chose Maine, and I ended up coming up here. I was, I can't put any blame on anyone else. It all falls back on me, but for me to have my bachelor's paid for, I did not take full advantage of that situation. And because I was a good football, I don't talk about my football accolades, but I was a pretty good college player. And because of how well I played, I just expected that the sky was the limit and I would be in the NFL. And so I did not take advantage of my bachelor's. I ended up getting a bachelor's. I knew I wanted to work with kids, so I just went child development, family relations. I said, you know what, that is my piece. And unfortunately, my academic advisors, they did not stop me from my plan. I wish they would have, but they didn't. And I love numbers, and I love math was my guaranteed A. I think I ended up finishing with statistic or pre-calculus or one of those, and I love math. But had an opportunity to try out for the Washington Redskins, did not make the Redskins. Ended up training for a year or so, fell in love with a special ed class that I started working as an ed tech. The coach reached back out to me because if anyone knows me, they know that I ooze mentor. So I believe in the future, and I believe that I was placed here to help guide those who have not had the support that I've had or lived the life of support that I've been fortunate. I'm the last of 5 kids, and my family support me to whatever it is that I decide to do. They support me unconditionally. And I know that not everyone has that same background, so I have it in me to try to give all the wealth of support that I have onto those that don't have it. So my coach reached out to me, and he knew that I wanted to coach football or get back into football, and I wanted to finish my master's degree. So he called me, gave me the opportunity to come up and do a graduate assistantship as an assistant coach for the linebackers, which I did. Ended up doing that for a year and a half, and my lovely wife ended up getting pregnant, and I had to sit in and come to a realization in life that there are more important things than wealth and all the accolades, and it's your family.
Yeah.
So football coaching is a 96-hour-a-week job. No one ever told me that. I thought the coaches went home when I went home. I did not know that they were in the office 5 to 6 hours before us and 5 to 6 hours left. I had no idea. It's a hard job, and the more I looked into it, there are a lot of coaches' kids do not turn out well because they're absentee. And they're watching their parents or their father, in most cases, get all the praise of how good they are, how much they mentored all their players, and they're sitting at home not getting it. So that whole psychology is a little bit rough for me. I said, you know what, Coach Scott, I praise him. He's a great guy. And I sat down with him and he said, you know what, Jermaine, I respect you. I hear you. You know, best of luck to you. I know you're going to do well in whatever you do. Coming from New Jersey, in New Jersey, I've always heard minority. Never really understood what it meant. I'm like, minority? What do you mean? There are more minorities here than Caucasian folks. What do you mean they're minority? I have no idea what you're talking about. So I came to Maine, and here I am in a lecture class with 300 or so folks, and I'm running late from my practice because we always have practice first thing in the morning. And I come through the door just as the professor is about to start speaking. And it's one of those situations where the door is on out back. So everyone is looking forward and you hear the door go. So the professor looks up and all 349 students turn. And I look in the lecture hall and I am the only minority in the class. And I'm like, okay, this is what they meant. This is what they meant. So in saying that, when I started teaching, because I've always, I played football. If anyone knows, being on a football team, especially if you're one of the star players, you're not looking at players for what they look like. You're looking at them for the passion that they have and how much you can rely on them for what they need to do. Because I love football because at the end of the day, you need 11 players doing on the same page at the same time to be successful. If one of you guys are off somewhere, it's bound to fail. So you have to trust the guy that's right next to you. And at no point did I say, all right, you know, this person doesn't look like me, so I don't want him here. I'm like, okay, that person is good. I want him right next to me, regardless of what he looks like or whatever it is. So in saying that, when I coach not off of any biases. Granted, you know, in Maine, you know, you're getting your majority of population is going to be white, and the way that I interacted with some of these kids, some of these parents were thrown off by it. Some of the teachers were thrown off by it because I guess, you know, at the end of the day, seeing someone who looks like me interacting with someone that looked like the majority. For some folks, it threw them off because of how passionate I was, because I care. You know, it wasn't like, all right, this is just for me, a job for me to just get paid and then I'm done. I sat down with these kids longer than most. There were times where I was in school, I was in the building until the janitor and I were the only ones there, trying to mentor these kids through life, you know, because dad wasn't present. Mom was an alcoholic or there was some other drug addiction in the household. And I knew for me, like I told you before, these kids are our future. At the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that are going to be running this country. You know, I'd like to say I'm going to live for 300 years, but as we know, you know, that is not going to be the case. So
if anyone can do it, Jermaine,
you're in much better shape than me and Jim.
Yeah. The shape is just to hold it all together. It's the glue. That's all it is. 12 years of football is going to start to add up.
Yeah.
I decided that, you know, in high school, I was in, you know, one of my past relationships, I was very close with this individual's grandfather, and he was a retired police officer. And growing up in high school, he looked at me and said, I'll make a good police officer. And with all my aspirations of being an NFL player, I said, I hear you, but seeing what they were doing in our community and running around and chasing all these bad little kids, I'm like, I don't want nothing to do with that. I want absolutely nothing to do with that. And, he said, well, if you change your mind, I believe that you'd be great at it. And the opportunity came to join the police force. And, I said, me being a teacher, I do not have as much impact and I do not have enough power to be able to take some of these kids out of the household or be able to go in the house and straighten some of the things that need to be straightened out. So I said, you know what, let me go ahead and put on the uniform. And it's been 8 years and I've been able to get back into school because after 6 years of chasing some of the criminals around and dealing with 30-plus-year-olds doing the same crime over and over and over and over again and knowing me by my first name, I've come to the conclusion that, unfortunately, there's some adults that it's going to take something horrific for them to change. So I would rather deal with their kids and try to break that pattern before it ever gets started. So,
can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
What was what was your feeling or your experience with police officers in general before you decided to become one? Did you come in feeling awkward about that?
So that's a good question, Jim. In Jamaica, I will always go back to Jamaica because those are my pillars. Those years are my pillars. Anyone that knows early childhood education, within your first, 5-6 years or so, that personality that you have, that's going to be, there might be some tweaks here or there, but 5 or 6 or so, that's who you're going to be for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Where I grew up, we did not call the police. It's funny enough, I think I was telling Whitney the story or someone else. I probably told her the story over and over again. My mom, my house, I thought I was absolutely wealthy growing up in Jamaica because we would always have 1 million people at our house for dinners. We would, whenever anyone was going through any issues, my mom would be the shoulder for them to lean on. And, whenever there was an incident where a husband and wife had a quarrel and the wife ran over to our house and my mom was holding me. I think I was probably about 4 or 5. It's funny how these vivid memories stay with you. And the gentleman ended up throwing a machete, which is I think machete. You guys know what a machete is, right? I sometimes go back and forth between Patois and Jamaica, but it's a very long knife.
Yep.
Ended up throwing at her and trying to hurt her. Yeah, there we go. And
Man.
it came towards me, and luckily I had enough sense to jump over it, or I probably would have lost one of my legs. And in saying that, we handled things as a community. So whenever the police was called, whoever called the police, they needed to be sure that they either wanted the person who they called the police on to disappear, or they were okay with themselves disappearing. So whenever the police showed up, there was a good chance that someone was going to die and we're never going to see them again. So we handled things ourselves. My sister, to this day, she fears law enforcement. And it's funny, me being in uniform, I always joke about, if I was in New Jersey, she lives in New Jersey, I told her that I'd probably pull her over every single night when she's going home from work. But we grew up in fear of law enforcement because in Jamaica, you just don't call. I think back then, the police department closed at 7. So you were fending for yourself from 7 at night until 7 in the morning.
Yeah, that's like the worst time, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's like when you need them the most, almost.
Yeah, exactly. In New Jersey, when I came up to New Jersey, it's so funny. The town that I grew up in the suburbs, I was probably about 5 minutes away from the George Washington Bridge. So I call it the suburbs, but it would be a city, but it was the suburbs for me. And it's funny because we didn't have a train track. It was like the train tracks divided the city into, we had a huge Orthodox Jewish population, which was on one side of the train track. And you had $1 million houses, you had, mansions. And then on this side, you had the majority of the minorities. And you had you call it the projects, but the huge apartment buildings with, 100 or 40 or 50 apartments in it, and so the city was broken up into clutches. And there was one part that was patrolled a certain way, and there was another part that was patrolled a specific way, because you pile the majority and minorities together, and unfortunately, there was a huge drug run back and forth between the city and where we grew up. And so police officers they clustered a lot where I lived. So for me, my mom still had the same mindset about law enforcement, that you need to get your butt in. As soon as the lights come on, as soon as the street lights come on, you're in the house. And luckily for me, football took up majority of my time, and football is my passion. So I knew that at the end of the day, I didn't want to do anything to interfere with my dreams and hopes. But there was a huge fear of law enforcement, because we watched a lot of minorities get roughed up by law enforcement. Granted, I can't sit here and say that some of it wasn't due to the individual's actions, because there was a lot of drugs around the area and people were doing things they shouldn't do. But we saw it was majority of the time it was minorities being arrested that we witnessed. Yeah. So for me, I'm like, you know what? I know that guy. I don't see myself coming back to this town and arresting anyone that I went to school with. So I'm like, law enforcement, no way. So that was my take on law enforcement, and
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna, I think, jump right into some complicated stuff.
Yeah.
I assume you saw the George Floyd video.
Yeah.
I guess. What did you think when you saw it? What was your reaction? You come from I think, two interesting perspectives on this, and I'd love to hear what you thought.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the first piece that hit me was from that of law enforcement. I speak on the other side afterwards. Like I said before, I am passionate about my job. Anyone that's ever interacted with me in law enforcement, it's a memorable interaction, because I made sure that I did whatever I could to rectify whatever the situation was before I left them. I made sure that they understood that whatever their issue was the utmost importance for me. I decided to put on the uniform because I believe that I have a lot to give to the community, and I believe that I can guide some of the misguided adults, kids, whoever it is that I interact with, to possibly see life from a different perspective and to be able to correct whatever they did wrong or whatever wrong they're in. So for me, when I saw that, it was tough. It was tough. I've arrested folks before, and the piece about not being able to breathe, I've sat them up, and then they've talked about not being able to breathe, and I said, what do you mean you can't breathe? I'm not on you. And this situation, to see that officer kneeling on that gentleman, and to hear him scream out that I cannot breathe, and to hear that he was calling out for his mother, that's tough. And to see 3 other police officers stand around and not do anything, it tore the heart out of my chest. It absolutely tore the heart out of my chest, because that is not what law enforcement is supposed to stand for. We swore in to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We do not, I did not put on this uniform to take anyone's life that is not necessary to protect anyone else. Did not. We know that in the job, there's always an opportunity where you might be placed in a position where, to protect the general public or protect the third party, you might have to take someone's life. But to see that man do what he was doing, it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough. It was tough. Because that is not what the uniform stands for. And I'll tell you, from me being a black man and to see that no one came to his aid and to see that he was handcuffed. And for me, it's compiled, because before, you know, there was a young individual jogging in Georgia, and it's tough. It's tough. It's tough. That is not what we stand for. We're not here to kill people. We're here to protect people. I've dealt with folks who were trying to hurt me in many different ways, and I got the handcuffs on. And as soon as the handcuffs are on, the threat's no longer there. It's over. It's over. It's over. You know,
Yeah. You don't have to say anymore. I think anybody who watched that, if you're a human, your heart broke.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the reaction to this, and we're seeing a whole variety of reactions. I think what's difficult for me, the further you're away from a problem, the more simple the solution seems. I used this as an illustration before. It's like, you know, you're talking to somebody at work about their marriage, and he talks about how bad his marriage is. And from the outside looking in, you're not close to it. It's like, well, just do this, this, and this, and, you know, your marriage will be fine. And the guy hearing it's like, yeah, sure, you don't know my wife, or, you know, yeah, you don't know my husband. The further you are away, the problem seems simpler. And for people like me, I didn't grow up in Maine. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My mother was from Paterson, New Jersey. I grew up in the mix of nationality and culture, and my best friend was Black. My pastors were Hispanic. My dad's close friends were Vietnamese. I kind of grew up in it, but still growing up in it, and as close as I can be to it personally, I'm not really that close. I'm still a white guy who's never had to make decisions like you've had to make decisions. I've never feared talking to a police officer. I've never feared going into certain businesses. And so it's easy for people on this side of the problem to look in and say, yeah, there's a problem. Here's the solution. The closer you get to a problem, the more complicated it becomes. And I think that's a whole lot to ask a question. But the question is there a way for us to get closer? Is there something you could say that could pull us closer to the problem, maybe emotionally or intellectually, to see it differently? Because I think it's really easy for people on the outside to say, here's the problem, it just needs to be fixed. But from the people I've talked to, the problem is not simple. It's incredibly complicated, and it isn't a one-time event. This is thousands, hundreds of years, thousands of years. So I'm throwing a whole lot of pressure on you.
No, these shoulders are broad, Jim. These shoulders are broad, so I'll take it. You know, it's you know, you said it right. You know, if it's something that you've never experienced, it's hard for you to be able to comprehend it, especially if you're not someone that's ever thought along the line of someone who's racist and dislike an entire race off of whatever background they're from. Like, you know, if you've never been there or never experienced it, it's hard for you to understand the situation. So I take that in the same way that you look at racism. If you've never been a part of it, or heard a conversation, or heard someone say something a certain way, it's hard for you to believe that this is still going on. You know, we had a little conversation earlier about just the whole, you know, let's take the Black History Month. We talk about Black history when we talk about things that happened, you know, eons ago. And I say eons, you know, maybe 60 or 70 years ago. And we talk about it like it's in the past. We don't talk about the situation that's going on now. You know, your Trayvon Martin, you know, I don't want to throw out too many names, but the situation that's happening currently, we don't talk about it. And I don't know why. As an educator, or as a previous educator, you think that, all right, let's talk about the past. We made leaps and bounds. But let's talk about the issues that are still in front of us. I'll tell you a quick story. As a police officer, in uniform, with a cruiser, with a hat, because the hat makes it official, with the hat, I was called to a house by a 60 or so year old white lady. She heard something suspicious outside. This was during the daytime. I pull up in my cruiser right in front of the house, walked around the house, did not see anything. Again, like I told you, I have a passion for old people. I love them to death. And I want to help them as much as possible. I didn't know my grandparents. They passed away before I could have that bond with them and learn all the great things that they know. So whenever I have an opportunity to be around someone who has me by many years, I know that there's a wealth of knowledge. So I treat them like they're kings and queens. So I knocked on the door to try to give her some comfort, to let her know that law enforcement was here. She wouldn't open the door. She asked for an ID. I was absolutely dumbfounded. Jim, you've seen me in uniform.
Yeah, it doesn't look any more official than that.
You know, I literally looked at myself and looked at her through the peephole and said, "Ma'am, this is my ID. This is it.
I'm wearing it."
This is it. I said, if you don't believe that I am law enforcement, you can go look out the window. My police car is right there. There are too many people who are painting their cars like that and driving around in Bangor.
That's true.
But then I go, if you don't believe me, you can call down to the station. And I gave her the number to the station. And then she decided to open the door and talk to me. But I bring this story to you to just enlighten you guys. Like, this is something that I've never heard another white officer tell me that story. Never.
Yeah.
I've been on the force for 8 years. Never heard anyone say anything like that. But for me, I know it's this. You know, if you're not used to someone that looks like this, you know, and you know, I can't put that in the same position that we're talking about right now with the whole racist situation, but just take that into perspective. You have someone who's a law enforcement official knocking on your door because you called 911. Not like you didn't call 911 and I'm just coming out of nowhere.
True.
You called 911 and here I am representing the police force, knocking on your door to talk to you and let you know what the situation is. And you're hesitant to open the door because of what you see.
And I think too, it's tough that, you know, like you spoke to how, you know, in school you're learning about stuff that happened, you know, 50, 60 years ago. And then as you look at kind of, you know, my Facebook feed, or you look at social media and how things like this and they spike, and then everyone's, you know, there's this like unrest about it, and then it goes back down, and it goes back down not because anything's been solved, but because, you know, something, you know, different happens, and then we come back to this, and it's like, what is it, you know, what does it have to take to make it so that this doesn't, you know, go down and we wait till something else happens, you know?
Yeah. I'll tell you, this is the thing. The conversation needs to be had. It's a conversation that, you know, we look at it, we read it, we are appalled by it, and like you said, it goes away. It's not going away. You know, if we keep just sliding on the carpet and saying, you know what, right, that was an isolated situation that, you know, that won't happen again, it will. Because a lot of folks are afraid to have hard conversations. And, you know, I spoke to Jim earlier. I'm like, I've had a conversation with my 11-year-old. And, you know, it's hard to figure out what is the right age to have that conversation. And for me, I think, you know, like I was telling you about being 5 and 6, you know, and to have all those base learning pieces already in place. I think this is an early conversation to have with your kids. You have to have it early and often. The context, you know, you understand how much you should be saying to your kids depending on their age. But I had a conversation with my 11-year-old about, you know, you are, you know, my wife is white and I am black, and my kids came out caramel. You know, I joke about it, but it came out caramel. Majority is they're not gonna look at my kids and think that they're white. They're gonna look at them and say they're black. And knowing that piece, I had a very hard conversation. I got a little bit emotional. I kept my game face on, but you know, I spoke to my child and I told her, I said, you know, at the end of the day, you're gonna have people who dislike you, possibly hate you just because of the way you look. And I know that's not a conversation that most households are having. But I told her, I said, regardless of how sweet you are, regardless of how smart you are, there's some things in life that's going to be hard for you. Just because there are people that dislike you because of the color of your skin.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could go into some personal things that I've been through, but, you know, I don't want to go too far into it, because I am the person that I am because I truly believe that, you know, God has placed me here to have a huge impact on society. There are a lot of folks that I've changed their opinions about people that look like me, and not even racist. You can't even just go to the extreme of being racist, because unfortunately, you know, we could say, I don't know where the line falls as far as being ignorant and being racist. But you have some folks that are genuinely, they don't hate, but they know what they know about being a minority from movies and the media. And unfortunately, we know the media usually portrays things that get a reaction, things that, you know, that either put fear in you or make you really happy. Unfortunately, when it comes to minority, you know, the happy piece is the sport and the movies and the acting and everything along that line, or the song, or the musician. The other piece is the criminals, you know, the fear of a very large black male, you know, possibly robbing you, raping you, stealing, whatever it is. And unfortunately, for some people, that's all they see and that's all they know, and they take that as law, and that's all I'm going to go off of. Yeah. So back to me, you know, I take the opportunity to have a conversation to let them know, you know, listen, what you see is not always, you know, coming back to the uniform. I've had, unfortunately, the unfortunate side is that the majority of minorities that are in the state are either here for school or they're here to deal drugs. And then you have some that are mixed in that, you know, they came here when they were younger and they grew up in the area. But unfortunately, the ones who are here to deal drugs, because there is a huge opiate addiction in this country, in this state, they know that there's an opportunity to make a lot of money. Those are the ones that are being seen on a regular basis as what minorities look like in the state.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had other black males that are being arrested and are looking at me and calling me a sellout and saying that we're the same. And I look at them and say, no, we're not. We're nowhere close to being the same. What you're doing right now is not anything that I'd ever do. You're doing something that hurt the community. I'm here to protect the community. Totally different. But unfortunately, people who watch the news, that's all they see.
You mentioned a little bit about God and all this, and I, as a pastor, I can't help but wonder, how does your faith in being a Jesus follower, how does it impact all of this?
So I'll try to make this as short as possible, because I'm so happy and so blessed that we've been able to come back into the church and to be with you guys, because there was definitely a good gap where I drifted away. I grew up Baptist, so I'd been in the church at a very young age, and we were in the church a lot. And for me, church felt like it was a job more so than something to bring the best out of me. Ever since I was younger, being 8 years old and staying in the crime-filled place that we were, without having any of us, my sister or I, injured, kidnapped, murdered, raped, whatever it was, and for us to go through that process and come to the United States safely, and for me to be a police officer with a master's degree coming from where I came from, and my sister to be a nurse practitioner and helping the people that she's helping, you could only sit back and say that this is God's doing. Like I said before, I was a really good linebacker. I don't like talking about myself too much, but I was pretty good. And for faith to drop the pins in the place where they did for me not to be able to make the NFL, and for me to come back here and to have the impact that I am having, and to save the amount of lives that I've saved through either a domestic situation or reviving someone from a drug overdose. I could only put faith behind it.
You know, as a pastor, I believe the church is the greatest vehicle of hope that there is. The message of Jesus changed the world once, and I think it can do it again. When we look at this issue in particular, a lot of people think there's nothing you can do. It's been this way since the beginning of time. It'll be this way to the end of time. I personally can't accept that. I believe there has to be hope. How do we as Christians own this problem and fight for change?
Like I said before, Jim, I solely believe that education is the route. Everything that I do, I try to educate. When I'm in uniform, if I deal with someone that's committing a crime, I sit there and talk to them exactly about what they did and how they could do something possibly a little bit different next time, so that way we're not in the situation that we're in. You let them know that it's nothing personal, but there are consequences for your behaviors. When it comes to this issue, that conversation has got to happen early and often, between adults, with your kids. Kids, again, the pattern needs to break. Unfortunately, the media is not the route to try to correct this issue, which they have the power to be able to start doing some things, because there are folks out there that listen to them and believe every word that comes out of their mouth and follow them to the T. But the hard conversation has got to happen. Unfortunately, we're programmed. I believe in habits, and I believe in you doing certain things. I believe in programming yourself. And it's funny. I started listening to gospel music because I was driving around and I felt angry in the cruiser for probably about 3 to 4 hours, and I couldn't figure out why I was angry. But it came down to me listening to negative music that was talking about, hurting people or doing other things that I am not for by any means. And I turned on gospel music, and I literally felt like there was a weight lifted off my chest and off my head. And because it was all about giving praise and thanks for everything that you've been through and everything that you got, and understanding that, you're never shouldering any issues by yourself. God is always there with you. And the conversation, like I said, it needs to happen. You need to sit there and talk. Me, look at myself. What biases do I have? What fears do I have of someone that looks like this? Or, someone that looks like that? Look at myself and say, all right, in any interaction I've had with someone, how did I react? Did I lock my door when, that gentleman just walked by? Why did I lock my door? Did I say hi to the guy that said hi to me that looked like me? Or did I jump and then say, oh, hi? It's one of those things, because I've walked by. It's funny because I've always been larger than everyone, and I've seen, from me being in the States for as long as I have, I understand the reaction. Not that I agree with it, but I understand the reaction, because there's a fear of the unknown. And I could say it's either my size, or it's either the fact that I'm a minority. But there are folks that get blown back away from me when I just, out of the blue, just say hi to them, because they're staring me down. So I say, hey, how are you doing? And it's like, hey, okay, hey, how are you doing? It's just try to pay attention to what you're doing, and just the biases. We all have biases. It's how we survive. You try to be prepared for something that you don't know that might happen. And unfortunately, the programming, because of what we watch and what's shown to us on a regular basis, it's showing us that there should be a fear of someone that looks like me.
Yeah.
In movies, the bad guy, unfortunately, a lot of the time looks like me. And it's one thing that you'd hope to change, but it's 2020, and as we see, we're still sitting in a situation where it's still going on.
Yeah, it's good,
Jermaine. I asked all my questions, but I'm going to throw one more out there for you, so it's not going to go up on the screen. this isn't a huge platform, but it's a platform. Is there anything you'd like to say to us, for people that are listening, for people that want to learn, for people that want to know what to say but aren't sure what to say?
I'd say, like I mentioned earlier, just be aware of yourself. It's so many things that people do that they're unaware of, but it could be perceived a certain way. Just focus on, just try to see where you fit in the things. I appreciated the way that you opened with the piece about, I believe that you had said it about, not saying anything is part of the problem, and it is.
Yeah.
I look at it as the question about which road, you're broken down on a road. One is the back road where a car is going by probably once every hour, or you break down on the highway. Which person is most likely to get help first? A highway where there's endless traffic is going to be the guy on the back road, because they know that he's by himself and another car is probably not going to come in about an hour or so. On the highway, the guy who's going by, he's like, yeah, there's somebody behind me right now. They're going to help him. They're going to help him. They're going to help him. So I'd say just try to think to yourself about, just who you are and where you stand when it comes to these things, because it's still present. It's still present. And, again, like I said, my education piece about me said that, the curriculum needs to change to educate on current status of the situation, because it's still here. It might have changed. The form or what that person looks like that might be biased. You might not be able to tell who he is. They're not going to come out in the sheets and everything else like that. No, they're going to be right next to you smiling, but at home they're living a secret life.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to say something. You hear someone that says something that's off, don't just ignore it. Let that person know that's not okay. That's not okay by any means. That's wrong.
Absolutely.
Just because that person who you're offending is not around, I don't agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Just because I don't look like that person that you're offending doesn't mean that it's okay to talk like that. So.
I think that was a great conversation about an incredibly evil problem. But here's the thing. I also believe there is hope. And more specifically, I believe the church is the vehicle for that hope. After Jesus' death and resurrection, the church began. And there was a huge racial and cultural divide in the church. But not between two groups of people, but between five. The Jews, who looked down on the non-Jews because, they weren't Jews. The Gentiles, who felt like the Jews looked down on them because they did. The slaves, who wished to be freed. And the freedmen, who were able to kind of purchase or win their freedom. And women, who had absolutely no rights at all. And all five began to follow Jesus and showed up at church. And somehow they worked through their race issues and cultural issues and began to move beyond extraordinary division. And I want to highlight one example of this, because hopefully this will give you a little hope. Peter, all of you Catholics and maybe former Catholics, you know him, right? He is the man when it comes to the church. Peter is also a great illustration of this conflict. 15 years after the resurrection, he still doesn't like the Gentiles. He still feels that they're inferior. 15 years after Jesus and all Jesus did to tear down those barriers, there was still a racial divide. God loves them, but he doesn't love them as much as he loves me because, I'm Jewish. Then one day, God interrupts Peter's quiet time and instructs him to go to the coast to a Gentile's home and tell them about Jesus. Peter obviously resists, but he's never been to a Gentile's home before. But he does what the Lord asks. And this isn't just any Gentile. This is a Roman centurion, a Roman soldier. This is the terrorist of terrorists for a Jewish man. Peter goes to Cornelius' home, and here's the picture. He's gone up the coast. He's about to enter into Cornelius' home, and the story picks up in Acts. And Luke tells us, while talking with Cornelius, Peter went inside, and I think he may have even stood at the threshold for a moment and took a deep breath and thought, maybe I can just hold my breath and get out of here without breathing any of this Gentile air. Peter went inside and found a large gathering, a large group of people that Cornelius had invited into his home. Friends, neighbors, everybody's there. They're packed in. The house is pretty much full of these wealthy guys listening to what Peter would have to say, right? They want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Peter is, I'm sure in this moment, just completely overwhelmed with what's about to happen. He enters into Cornelius' home, and there's this immediate racial divide that everybody can feel because Jews don't go into Gentiles' home. They don't visit Gentiles' home. And he kind of says this up front because this is exactly the world they're dealing with. Right? Jews don't mix with Gentiles, and whites shouldn't mix with blacks, and there's all this race issues. 15 years after the resurrection, after all Jesus did, Peter gets to the front of the room, and this is where our text picks up. He says, God has shown me that I shouldn't call anything impure or unclean. I mean, imagine opening with that line, right? You're impure and you're unclean. It's just unreal. But no one argued with him because that was the level of racism they were facing. I may have lived my entire life believing this, but God has showed me. But God has showed me. I may have been raised this way, but God has showed me. Something happened on the inside of Peter that changed his perspective forever. It changed the way he lived. About 5 years later, there's this big meeting in Jerusalem, and they finally put this issue to rest. There's something bigger going on here than Jew and Gentile, or slave men or freedmen, or men or women. There's something bigger that God's doing. In Acts 15, but both of these groups, they kind of come together with this theological and cultural concessions that they have to make to move forward in the church. And this is how they did it. And there is hope, and the hope can start with us. And I know what you're saying, Jim, this is a great conversation. Glad we talked. But in a few days, a few weeks, it's all going to go back to normal. Nothing's going to change. But here's the thing. We know it changed once, because we are the products that change took place 2,000 years ago, and here we are. I believe, and I hope you believe, that change can happen again. But you know where it happened 2,000 years ago? Not in culture. It happened in the church. As the church grew in influence, so did a sense of unity among people who had very little in common. So we're looking at the world, we're looking into society, and we're asking this question: how will it ever change? And I believe it can, but I believe it starts with us in the church. Prejudice is almost impossible to see in the mirror because it's hidden in our heart. It disguises itself as that's how I was raised, or that's just the way of the world. But here's what I want for all of you watching. Would you ask God to do for you what he did for Peter? God, would you show me? Would you help me to spot it? Would you help me to despise it the way that you do? Would you help me to despise it and stop excusing it? Would you help me to eradicate it from my heart? The reason the church has to be the epicenter of this discussion is because only in the church are you taught that when I look at you, when I look into your eyes, I'm looking into someone who was created in the image of God. You cannot mistreat my children and get along with me, and I cannot mistreat you and get along with God. And that is the message of the cross. But here's the thing. After talking with Jermaine, I believe there's something else you can do. It's going to be awkward, and for some of you, it's going to be difficult. It may be a bit time-consuming, but it has the potential to shift your perspective and maybe change your life. If everybody in the United States did what I'm about to suggest, we would all be better for it. I want you to begin an ongoing, honest dialogue, a conversation with someone whose skin is a different color than yours. Maybe a friend, a coworker, maybe somebody who you serve with at church. And when they suggest you read something, I want you to read it. And when they suggest you listen to something, I want you to listen to it. This is for all of us. I want you to ask for permission to reach out. When you have a question, when you hear something you don't understand, when you see something that bothers you. And I want you to be honest with your questions. Be a student first and a critic second. Will that change the world? No. But it might change your world. And that's a start. Let me pray for us before you go. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for the bravery of Jermaine and his family to come forward and have a conversation, Lord, that I'm sure was incredibly difficult for them, as I know it was difficult for me. God, I know that race goes beyond politics. God, it's a human issue, and I know you care deeply about it because you've created us all to be like you, to be your image bearers. And no one should be mistreated because of their skin color or where they come from nationally or their orientation, God, or their gender. We were all created to be your image bearers, God. And for the evil of allowing that into our hearts, into our lives, Lord, even into our churches, I ask for your forgiveness. Will you forgive us, God, and will you help us from this day forward to be like Peter, that God showed me that I was wrong, and he showed me the right way. And would you help us to live that way? Would you give us the courage to confront those hidden areas in our heart that we didn't even know were there, God, but they are there? Would you help us to confront it? And would you help us to eradicate it and despise it like you did? And then would you give us the wisdom to move forward and to begin a dialogue and a conversation with somebody who maybe doesn't look like me, God, but has a heart like I do and a soul like I do. It matters just as much to you as I do. And would you help us to learn something? I thank you, God, for the faithfulness and for the bravery of people like Jermaine. I thank you for the bravery of good and honest police officers. I pray that you would protect them. I pray that you would protect, God, all of us, that you would help us to end hate, and you would help us to move forward with that hope, the hope of the cross, the hope of your love, love that overcomes all sin, and love that gives us a new start. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. I'll see you back here next week for part 2 of Better For It.
Celebrate good times. School's out. Dun, 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 dun.